Okay, so recording started. Okay, good. Let's see. Okay, so if you remember last week, we start talking about things like survivorship bias and various startup ecosystem in not only at the university but around Saigon and so on. I also sent a lot of links to the Zalo group to remind you that there's lots of competitions and eco events and so on to do with startup and entrepreneurships and so on. So for those who are interested, please register or even attend a lot of these video conferences. Nowadays, especially with COVID and pandemic and so on, a lot of these conferences, luckily for you guys, a lot of these conferences around the world to do with startups or entrepreneurships and so on are now beginning to become online as well. So a lot of these conferences are available to you. And not only that, they are free to register and enter and attend. So for those who are interested, and hopefully by attending a lot of these events, you can learn a lot about entrepreneurships and startups and various different innovatives of like sectors from IoT, artificial intelligence, and many more to do with emerging technologies and so on. So I sent quite a few on the various different chat channel, the eBiz Hub chat channel. Let's just remind yourself. Takes a short while. There's a lot of links connected to this. So things like conference on women in fintech and AI and other to do with startup and training programs. Most of these are free. So you're welcome to register yourself and attend a lot of these conferences, which I sent to on eBiz Hub in Zala. For those who are interested, most of these conferences will help you. At least it will explain and use a lot of different kind of languages and so on. So you get used to it. In entrepreneurships and startups and so on, there's a lot of terminologies and so on. So by attending a lot of these conferences, you will understand the new concepts and new terminology associated with startups and businesses and so on. Like AIoT, I think it's artificial intelligent Internet of Things. Things which I just mentioned earlier, things like fintech, which is financial technology, AI, which is artificial intelligence, and so on. Yeah. So last week we talked about survivorship bias. In general, you should not only follow the example which we had was Google. So you don't only read book or learn from successful companies or successful people to be successful. You need to learn from company which has failed as well, or unsuccessful people who try and fail. Even when we talk about a lot of these successful examples such as Google, Facebook, and so on, a lot of these founders like Mark Zuckerberg and Page and Brin, they have failed in the past, or they have learned a lot of their lessons from failure as well. So for them, even they don't learn from successful companies. They themselves have failed and learned a lot of lessons from their failure. And you'll see that in your clean tech assignment. In clean tech assignments, basically, when you first feel attempt to play the clean tech assignment, you will fail. But by failing, you learn lesson. You learn lesson how to avoid failure. In general, those are the best lessons to learn. Is doing it and then fail and then learn from your mistakes. And a lot of the very successful companies as well as entrepreneurs have done so. So a lot of the successful examples of like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and so on, they have failed to, they set up companies in the past, have failed in the past. So hence they learn a lot of lessons and they adapt a lot of their lessons to the successful companies. So in certain ways, they avoid the survivorship bias by not reading their own books, but learning from their experience, learning from their failures, and so on. Last week, we also talked about the various different ecosystems, competitions, and so on, which happens throughout Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City, in various different university and outside of university as well. Yeah. The ecosystem can quite be big in Vietnam, especially with the government's policy to do the startup nations and so on. There's a lot of money flowing into startups. But I guess in the past 2 years, 2020, 2021, things a bit slower because of COVID and pandemic. And especially with the vaccine and so on, Vietnam is short of money. Yeah, so they've spent a lot of money to buy vaccine or acquire vaccine. But not only that, a lot of money to help various business, especially in lockdowns and so on. So there might be less money going into startup in the next year or so. But hopefully it will recover. Especially with the pandemic, we kind of seen pandemic before and lockdown before. After most pandemics, from the Spanish flu in 1919 and other pandemics such as SARS and MERS, more recently in 2000. After every pandemic, innovation and startups basically increase after each pandemic itself, because new requirements is required, and hence new companies are built up to offer the services or products relating to the pandemics itself. So in certain way, even though Vietnam government might have, not only Vietnam government, but all the governments around the world, might have less money to spend and help startups in the past years, the past 1 or 2 years during the pandemics and lockdowns. Hopefully, more opportunity created by the pandemic, and we can see new technology available nowadays, such as vaccine and a lot of these softwares and barcode, QR code applications and so on, appearing for lockdowns as well as pandemics as well. So there's a lot of opportunity around sort of like every pandemic, especially as we recover from the pandemics itself. So last week we gone through one of these examples. Some of these examples, a lot of my company which I'm involved in, they are examples of successful companies such as EduNet, and there are unsuccessful companies such as Tehebade and Pentalope and so on. And each one of these things which I do, I learn a lot of lessons from it and apply it to the things I do when it's to do with starting business or new businesses. So you can go to a lot of these ecosystems and events which I will try to post regularly on Zalo. And you can learn a lot of lessons from people who've gone through the process itself. So instead of you going through the process as well, make the same mistakes, yeah? Maybe going to a lot of these events or attending a lot of these online events, you can learn a lot of lessons and not make the same kind of mistakes. Okay, we'll switch to different topics. Now we'll talk more about national culture. We'll cover how culture or national or Vietnamese culture or other parts of the world's culture, such as European culture, American culture, or other Asian nations' culture, how each of these various different cultures affect entrepreneurships and startups. So there are three main principles. A certain portion of adults in the population can be classified as natural entrepreneurs, so they're born as an entrepreneur. They have all the necessary skill sets, and not only that, they will thrive and want to be entrepreneurs as well. We can measure this proportion, especially in a different culture, such as Vietnamese culture or American culture or European culture, how much of these natural entrepreneurs appear in the population due to the different culture or the different raising of children and so on, and encourage children to be entrepreneurs or starting their own business. So each country, including Vietnam, has a different culture. We'll cover how culture is different from country to country, and specifically compare Vietnam to other cultures as well. How we are different. What are the pros and cons of being a Vietnamese culture compared to a Western culture or other Asian culture? So a country, a culture, or even an ethnic group can be rated whether it's higher or lower in entrepreneurial activities than others. So pros and cons or advantages or disadvantages of each and every culture when it comes to starting a business. And luckily for us, many researchers have shown that national culture, as well as ethnicity, whether you are Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, or German, or Danish, or British, or so on, how each of these ethnicity or culture affects starting businesses, as well as entrepreneurships, as well as economic development as well. Each of these countries has different ethnicity, cultures, and so on, and they affect the economic development in each of these different countries, as well as startup, as well as how people view startups on entrepreneurship in general. So hopefully we'll try to cover how Vietnamese culture, as well as ethnicity, affect entrepreneurships or startups in general. Before we jump into the Vietnamese culture and how it affects businesses in general, we need to figure out where is Vietnam in the concept of things, in a global concept? So the World Trade Organization has defined the countries in different stages of development. So stages of development of an economy. This is quite an old report, so take it with a pinch of salt. I'll try to update it at a later date, but country or nation in general takes time to change anyway. And this is only about 6 years ago, or 7 years ago. Vietnam pretty much is at what we call a factor-driven stage. Other country, such as Thailand, is what we call an efficient-driven stage. And more advanced country or developed nations and so on, is that what we call, or the World Trade Organization defined as innovation-driven stage. So it kind of or developing, or emerging, or towards early stage of economic development. Vietnam is still pretty much being defined as a factor-driven stage. So countries which are, so at the early stage of development, of economic development, that is, such as Vietnam, are defined as factor-driven stage because they comprise of, they basically compete on resources which they are being endowed with, or which they already have. So in other words, factor endowments. So things like primary unskilled labor, as well as natural resource. And Vietnam has a lot of that. Things like primary unskilled labor, Vietnam has been utilizing it in the form of like unskilled labor, such as textile and garments and factories and manufacturing and so on. And Vietnam also has a lot of natural resources as well. In the past 10 years or 10 years ago, Vietnam's exports or income in general relied on natural resources. So Vietnam's biggest export product 10 years ago was oil and gas, including things like rice, coffee, and so on. A lot of these are natural resources which comes out of the land in Vietnam. So the natural resources in Vietnam without any value added, anything like that. Separate to that, 10 years ago, a lot of our export income, or Vietnam's export income, has come from the textile and garment business. And in general, textile and garment are unskilled labor and low-cost labor in general. So countries such as Vietnam, who is in the factor-driven stage, compete basically on the basis of business, on prices, as well as selling products or commodities with their low productivity reflecting low-cost labor and low-cost goods as well. So by exporting things like oil and gas, which are raw material, to other country, and other country process those oil and gas into petroleum products like plastics and petrol and gasoline and so on. Those other country added value, and in general they sell the product at a higher price compared to the raw materials such as oil and gas or even rice and coffee. Those in general are what we term as commodities, and hence they attract a lower price overall. Whereas value-added products such as plastics and products made from coffee, such as instant coffee or cakes and so on, where other country added value to it, tends to attract a lot more price. But country are factor-driven. They only sell natural resources, so commodity products at a very low margin, and hence in countries such as factor-driven country, they can only afford to pay their labor or their people very low wages. So maintaining competitiveness at this stage, or factor-driven stage of development, hinge primarily on well-functioning public and private institutions, as well as developing infrastructure for export. So exporting oil and gas, so you need ports and terminal to have oil tankers or gas tankers to transfer these products, or ports to transfer coffee commodities such as coffee and rice and so on to other countries. So you need a well-developed infrastructures and transport infrastructure as well as a stable macro economy and a healthy, low-cost workforce as well. Not necessarily highly educated, I think a basic education, especially in textile and garment and commodity businesses in general, tends to need very basic education. So you don't need to be a highly educated workforce as well to be in a factor-driven country. The next stage of economic development is the efficiency-driven stage. And in general, Vietnam is moving towards the efficiency-driven stage. As Vietnam having a lot more and more each year, manufacturing jobs and so on, creating Vietnam, because Vietnam now is a good location for not only low-cost labor, especially for manufacturing and so on, and factories and so on. But in addition, Vietnam also have a skilled workforce. But Vietnam has been still a young country. So after entering the global market itself through attaining the World Trade Organization and so on, to have access to the global market itself, Vietnam has moved very fast away from factor-driven stage and towards the efficient stage. So we're moving and catching up with countries such as Thailand very quickly. Thailand has a head start when comparing to Vietnam. Since the Vietnam War during the 1970s and so on, which Thailand hasn't had to go through. So for them, the economy has not been in a slowdown or blocks, and hence a lot of their manufacturing and factories are in a lot more advanced stage compared to Vietnam. But when countries which primarily dependent on exports of factories and manufactured products and so on, such as Thailand, and also now Vietnam's becoming more and more like Thailand. These countries become more competitive or dependent more on their skilled workforce and also their manufacturing efficiency and so on. So hence they compete more on productivity of their factories because of the saving created by more efficient manufacturing and production. They can afford to pay their labor higher salaries overall. So productivity will increase, there will be a saving, and wage will rise with advancing development, especially in automation and so on. So as a factory or manufacturing become more and more efficient, right, replacing labor by automation and so on, there will be a lot of savings. So hence the savings can be passed on to the employees and so on in the form of higher salaries and so on. But with advanced developments and so on, you need an educated workforce as well. So country will then move into the efficient stage from the factor-driven when they begin development more efficient production process like automation and so on, as well as increasing the quality of the products itself. Hence, there will be saving and wage will rise. So in Thailand, typically cost of labor will be more expensive and salaries will be higher, mainly because of these more efficient productions and processes, so automation. So at this point, competitiveness become increasingly driven by higher educated workforce, as well as training, efficient market, better transport, better ports and logistics and so on are needed, not only to save efficiency in terms of manufacturing production, but also efficiency saves in transport and exports and logistics and so on as well. So to support all that, they also need a developed financial market to reduce the cost of financing for these factories and automation and so on, and also have the ability to harness the more advanced or existing technology, both in the domestic market as well as foreign market. Don't forget, both markets are very important. As the employee get increase in salaries and so on, their spending on consumer goods and so on will need more manufacturer or production for the domestic market as well. So it's not only a foreign market like Vietnam's dependent on, but as the workforce in Vietnam become richer and richer or enter the middle class, they will need consumer products and so on, and hence the domestic market will also help drive the economy as well. After the efficient-driven is the innovation-driven. So the example of innovation-driven, such as Singapore, and we talk a lot about startup nation, government in Vietnam are driving startup nation and so on. Because in addition to natural resources and raw material, as well as automation, savings, the more innovation created, you're creating products or new services out of nothing. So as innovation comes in, new economy or economy driven out of new innovation or new technology are created as well, in addition to raw material commodities as well as saving in terms of automation. So Vietnam wants to jumpstart the startup nation mainly to drive more innovation and technology to help advance the Vietnam economy even faster. So in general, Vietnam and most countries don't want just to advance to the efficient-driven stage, such as automation and saving in terms of efficiency and production, but they also want to jump to this innovation-driven stage as well. Yeah. In these countries, not only you are having savings in terms of efficiency and production, but by generating or increasing the number of startups or innovation-driven kind of factories or production or products or services, you're going to create more economy as well. So, for example, recent innovations, for example, mobile phones or mobile apps or the internet even, or even social networking. These innovations came out from nothing. Before social networking or internet, what was the alternative? So hence, new innovation create not only new jobs and new revenues for people, it adds to the economy as well. So by generating new revenues and so on, country in innovation-driven stage can also afford to pay their workers, their employees, even higher salary as compared to, say, a production or efficient production saving. So employees and workers in such countries such as Singapore can pay and can afford to pay their employees at a higher price. So wages will also be driven not only from production saving, but also new revenue from new innovation. So wages will risen by so much that they are able to sustain the higher salaries associated with an economy such as Singapore. As well as a higher standard of living as well. Vietnam wants to pretty much jump past this efficient stage with their startup nation policies and so on, and try to increase the number of startups or innovations. In general, Vietnam, a lot of revenue from Vietnam, more than 50% of revenue from within Vietnam is actually comes from small, medium-sized enterprises. It is not the big companies which generate a lot of these economy, because big companies can get big. Yeah, in terms of growth, they don't have a lot of growth. Whereas startups or small, medium-sized enterprises has huge potential for growth. So for a country who wants to grow fast, you got choice. You can either invest in companies which are already big and doesn't really have a lot of potential to grow even further, or invest or drive the small size or medium size enterprises which has a lot of potential for growth itself. So in general, startups and innovation, most countries tends to try to motivate or even inject a lot of help and finance into startups and so on, because the potential for growth actually comes out of these small, medium-sized enterprises or innovation-driven stages or innovation-driven startups. So country like Singapore, who depended more on innovation-driven stage and so on, tends to have a higher standard of living, higher salaries and so on overall for their workforce itself. And in general, they will compete on new or unique product or services. Should be services as well, yeah. At this stage, companies must compete by producing new technology and different technology or innovation of goods, products, and services using more sophisticated technology and innovation. Yeah, so hence, in the media in Vietnam, we hear a lot about things like Industry 4.1, artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on. Those kind of innovation and technology will drive the economy much faster than other form of savings, such as efficiency in productions and so on as well. Okay, let's see what the time is. 2 p.m. Okay, so culture. The different stages that Vietnam is in, especially a factor-driven stage, which is Vietnam is in, we tend to rely more on raw materials such as rice and exporting rice and coffee, oil, gas, a lot of these agricultural goods, such as marine products such as fish and food products as well. In general, most of these are raw material itself or commodity, which are exported to other country, and other country will process these products into value-added good. And in general, in other country, a lot of these products tend to be retail at a higher price compared to if Vietnam sell rice, raw materials such as rice and coffee, or even fish and prawns and so on to other countries itself. So a lot of value escape Vietnam itself because of the factor-driven stage itself. We lose out on the value-added side of things, or upchaining into the supply chain itself. So let's look through what kind of startups come out of Vietnam and what entrepreneurs in Vietnam tend to focus on and so on. So in general, this research, key finding from the Global Entrepreneur Monitor, GME, tends to produce a report every year. You can access this report at this website here. Let's go for it. So the report summarizes response from entrepreneurs in Vietnam. So these are real questions answered by real entrepreneurs in Vietnam. Yeah, so hopefully it will give us a more clearer data or clearer reason why entrepreneurs in Vietnam start business, or what kind of problems they tend to face. The issue with this report is because we had COVID and pandemic for this past few years, we don't have the latest report. But in general, they tend to have a report every year. There should be more reports as well. It's probably, here you go, a little more. So you see 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. 2019 is not there because usually it takes the end of the year to report the previous year. You collect the data throughout the year, and then you report early in the following year. But in the following year, 2000 and 2001, well, in general, we were affected by the COVID pandemics and so on. So the latest reports are available. So the nearest report which we have is 2017, 2018. Yeah, we don't have 2019, and we don't have 2020. Yeah, because early in 2021 would report into 2000 because of COVID pandemics. Yeah, so 2 reports is missing. The 2 latest report, 2019 and 2020. Let's just dive in one of these reports. I summarize the reports in the lecture notes itself, but let's look at the source of the data. How are these reports generated? So these reports are generated by interviewing entrepreneurs or Vietnamese entrepreneurs throughout the country itself, throughout Vietnam. You get these reports for other countries like Germany, US, UK, Denmark, Holland, and so on. But specifically, this report will only cover Vietnam. So this is a report based on survey of just over 2,000 individuals and 36 experts. So it's relevant data. This is quite a sizable sample rate. So hopefully it will give us a good indicator of Vietnam as a general when it comes to entrepreneurship. Let's look at the summary of the reports itself. So in Vietnam, which is a factor-driven country, in general, the perception of existence of opportunity in terms of business and entrepreneurs or startups and so on is relatively quite low when it comes to factor-driven countries. So when we talk about factor-driven countries, example would be like Philippines, India, Iran, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Botswana, Bolivia, Angola. So these are the example of country which is in the factor-driven stage. Don't forget, factor-driven stage depended more on raw material and low-cost labor. But in general, opportunities in factor-driven country tends to be a lot higher. There's more opportunity when it comes to business entrepreneurships compared to the efficient-driven or the innovation-driven country. So Vietnam is below the average. So below the average compared to like Philippines and India and so on. So about 50% of Vietnamese are aware of their business capabilities. In general, on average, such as in India and Philippines, the average is around 41, 42%. So Vietnam's slightly above that. Yeah, so it's not too bad. 25 of respondents, of over 2,000 respondents, that is, 36 experts, intend to start a business in the next 3 years. This is quite high. This has been increasing since 2012 and 2013. In 2013 or so, this number was about 18%. So the number of people who intend to start a business in Vietnam has increased. Quite a substantial increase, from about 18% to 25% or so. So it's an increase of about 7% to 8% or so. But this is lower than the average when it comes to factor-driven countries such as India and the Philippines and so on, yeah, which tends to have around 30%. And in Vietnam, entrepreneurs are highly appreciated in society. Around 75% of the population in Vietnam appreciate entrepreneurs. Yeah, they are contributor to society, and not only that, the economy. They create jobs. Yeah, so helping society. But by creating jobs, they add to the economy as well. So in general, in Vietnam, it's quite a highly appreciated career path. Up to about 75% of the population, or at least of this sample, appreciate entrepreneurs. Yeah, so they respect entrepreneurs like doctors and engineers and scientists and so on. So it's a respectable career path, and it's a desirable career choice. Yes, around so like 62% survey of Vietnamese adults desire this particular career. Yeah, so it's respectable, like a doctor, a lawyer, or engineer, that kind of thing. Maybe a little bit more respected compared to engineers and lawyers. Oops. The percentage of adults who own and manage established business, when we talk about established business, we talk about companies or startups which has been around for more than 3 years. Yeah, typically, most startups tend to fail in their first year. So for companies which survive for 3 years, it's classified as established companies. So we can see here, around 25% of Vietnamese want to start a business. And of that, around just slightly below 25% become successful. So in general, the chance of success tends to be a lot higher, especially in Vietnam, because it's a fast-growing economy. In fast-growing economy, the entire the economy is growing upward. So for startup, you get buoyed up or floated up by the whole economy itself. So chance of success in country, fast-growing economy countries such as Vietnam tends to be a lot higher. So it's higher than the average compared to other factor-driven countries such as Philippines and India. So the whole process, when we looking at in terms of startups, which are the 25% intended, or established, which is 24.7%, which we talked about, which we looked at earlier, yeah, the 24%, and we looked at number. They are a process. So basically, you have like business startups, less than 3 months. So very early stage startup and later stage startups. It can be divided into these two. So you see this pipeline feeding in. Yeah, so don't forget, this is before the business start. First 3 months of the business start. Quite a few companies has failed during the process. And then 3 years later, the successful companies, the established companies come out at the other end. A lot of failure happened in their first year. So these are the early stage. Most of the failure happened here. And then as companies survive past their first year, chance of success is a lot higher, and they will survive to the 3 years and become established business themselves. Like any other country, Vietnam adults start business mainly to take advantage of opportunity. Around something like 84% or so is to start a business to take advantage of opportunity. Compare that to the remainder, 15% or so, because there's no better choice for work. The majority of businesses is to take advantage of opportunity. And in general, Vietnamese take opportunities mainly to increase their income. So the biggest reason, around 50% of entrepreneurs, or of those 2,000 responded, more than 2,000 responded, and 36 experts, is to increase their income rather than the excuse of being more independent itself. So in general, starting business or owning business doesn't not mean you are independent. You still have to report to governments, tax authority, your customers, and so on. You're not independent per se. You may be independent of your boss, but you're not independent of your customers and the tax authorities and so on. So substantial reason is to increase income. And in general, most startups in general, in most countries, are basically run by male. So the number of male engaged in business usually higher than compared to female in all these stages. So before startup, early stage startup, later stage startup, or established business, virtually all these stages are dominated by male. But surprisingly, Vietnam is slightly different. Yeah. So here we're talking about other country as well as other factors such as efficiency driven or innovation driven. Most other countries around the world are dominated by male. But in Vietnam, that has changed. In 2017, 2018, the rate of women participating in business startup activity was higher compared to male. Yeah, at least at the startup stage, yeah, the early stage. The established stage, late stage, are still dominated by male, but hopefully this will feed through. Early stage will become later stage and become established companies, and hopefully more and more female or women will be business owners and so on as well. That's one of the exceptions compared to other countries. And in general, the percentage of people who engage in business activities, especially in the early stage in Vietnam, tends to be higher in the age group between 25 to 34 years old. And they are all mainly highly educated level, so such as university or MBA or master kind of level. So in general, it tends to have some kind of university degree as well. In general, these age group and higher education level tends to start new business activities. And what kind of business activities in Vietnam do they start? So in general, majority of entrepreneurs in Vietnam start businesses which serves the consumers, which is a good thing. 75% of the population, of the entrepreneurs and business in general serves the consumers. Consumers, especially in the middle class, we talked about earlier. In Asia, the number of middle class is increasing. Vietnamese in general getting richer and richer every year. And as they have more and more money to spend, they're going to spend more and more on consumer products. So being in consumer products in a growing economy such as Vietnam, or fast-growing economy such as Vietnam, can be profitable as such. So business owner mainly receive tips and advice from their friends and their family. We'll cover more about these kind of research and in Vietnam in details later on. The business corporation generally focus more on sales and the marketing stage rather than the manufacturing and even the innovation and technology stage itself. So mainly we import or buy technology and products or services from other countries, and then focus, these companies tend to focus more on sales and marketing in Vietnam to sell to consumers itself. So there's an opportunity there. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to, instead of buying products from say China or Korea or European country and sell it to the Vietnam consumer markets, there are opportunity to come up with new products in the internal Vietnam market itself to supply to these sales and marketing businesses to offer to consumers. In general, majority of startups which fail or discontinue their business in the 2017-2018 is 4.2%, which is relatively quite small. So 2.5% of them shut down their business, and 1.7% continue to be operated. The three main reasons why businesses fail. The largest reason is financial problems, followed by lack of profit. And lastly, have another jobs or business opportunity. So the majority of Vietnamese or entrepreneurs give up or discontinue their business due to either financial reason, lack of profit, or other opportunity available to them. But the main problem in Vietnam, although this situation is slowly changing, is Vietnamese business or Vietnamese startups, and we'll see the business plan which the class will submit, and a lot of your submission for the eBiz assignment, you will also see this. You see it will be in relatively, I mean, this is from my experience anyway, from previous semester classes, tends to be low innovation driven in general and low international orientation. So a lot of these business plan will be consumer focus or internal or Vietnamese consumer market and low tech. So example would be such as restaurant, or a lot of, every year there's always someone who submits in a business plan on a cafe. And in Vietnam, we have cafe everywhere. Vietnam needs another cafe like it needs another hole in the head. We don't need too many holes in our heads, by the way. So in general, hopefully that's why I do what I do in this class. Try to encourage you guys to experiment with emerging technology or innovation and so on. A little bit more innovation compared to just cafe and restaurant. And in general, innovation technology will help push us into that innovation-driven stage itself. And not only that, I try to encourage you guys to do websites and apps and so on. These will expose you to the international market as well. So anyone in the world can access the web page. Anyone in the world can access to your Android apps or iOS apps on app stores or Play stores and so on. Yeah, rather than only people within Vietnam or within a country. Yeah, so in general, accessing the social networking, web page, mobile apps, and so on, you have a bigger audience. So hopefully, I'm hoping at least this year in the current class or this semester, there will be more business plan to do with more innovative and more international oriented business, hopefully, that and it will change from the low innovation and domestic kind of orientation. I think we can see that anyway when we look at the examples. Let's look at the example previous semester. A lot of them are pretty much food related, and so less so in terms of innovation or foreign market, export market orientation. So you see here food, fresh and fitness, vegan, cafe. And you see throughout here, most of these would be just food related or consumer market related and so on. Not a lot in terms of innovation or in terms of foreign market, international market. Yeah, most of these proposal in general or domestic market and not so highly innovative kind of technology. So hopefully the individual assignment where you explore more innovative kind of businesses as well as emerging technology, hopefully it will drive you to do something a little bit more innovative and globally focused rather than domestic market itself. Okay, we'll take a 15 minutes break and then we come back after break and continue. Okay, let's get back to the class. Before we start, can you hear me?
Yes, teacher.
Okay, good, good. Let's just change a few things around. Okay. I sent us out a message in terms of registering your team. So please, each team leader, can you go onto the spreadsheet and register your team? If possible, also create a group name as well, so we know which team, who's who. That's great. Okay, let's carry on. Okay, so before the break, we covered this survey of around 2,000, more than 2,000 entrepreneurs in Vietnam, as well as 36 experts in Vietnam, about what kind of business they choose, what kind of problem they face in Vietnam. So it's all Vietnam related stuff. Why they, if they shut down their business or discontinue the business, why they discontinue the business, and what kind of business do they operate, such as consumers and so on. And where do the advice they get from, such as friends, families, and so on. Okay, let's continue with that. This is the most recent one, survey. There tends to be a new survey every year, but since the COVID, we don't have the latest 2019 and 2000 survey. So the best we can do, at least for this year, is 2017, 2018 survey. So it's a bit old, relatively old, not vastly old. It's only 2 or 3 years ago. The survey also found other indicators, especially in the Vietnam market. What are the problems associated with Vietnam, the condition in Vietnam? So among the 12 indicators, which we will cover, so the 12 indicators, if you want to know what they are these 12 indicators. So things like finance, national policies and regulation, national policy, general policies, governmental programs, education, primary and secondary education, post-school, R&D, and so on. There should be 12 of these choices which the survey given to the entrepreneurs and experts. If you're looking for where the weakness lies and where the strength lies, you look at how far these graphs gets to the edge. Yeah. So we're most interested in the Vietnam group. This is the average across all survey country. Yeah. So we're interested in the blue line. So Vietnam's high in terms of internal market dynamic, as well as infrastructure. So the infrastructure is good for entrepreneurs. And Vietnam is weak, yeah, so where the blue lines is low. So here, the high strength is between 4 and 5. The weakness, the lowest one, is between 2 and 3. Such as finance is where one of the weaknesses, as well as R&D transfer, another weakness here. So we're interested in the blue line. The red line is just the average. So the top Actually, let me format this to make it look better. So the three highest ranking indicator are the internal market dynamic. So the domestic market, especially Vietnam being a fast-growing economy and so on, and the number of middle class or consumers are increasing. So the dynamic in terms of internal market is high in Vietnam. Other high area such as cultural as well as social norm. We kind of seen pictures of what a typical street in Vietnam looks like. Yeah, culturally, entrepreneurships and so on is part of Vietnamese culture. Every ground floor, even on the streets, in front of people's houses and buildings and so on, there are people doing business. And it's part of the social norm, especially in Vietnam. Other good and strong high rankers are infrastructure for entrepreneurships and so on as well. Yeah, so these are the three highest ranking: internal or domestic market, cultural as well as social norm to do businesses in Vietnam, as well as infrastructure to doing business in Vietnam. The three low rankers are lack of capital or finance available for startups. But typically in a fast-growing economy, finance tends to be, availability of finance tends to be a lot more difficult because fast-growing economy, everyone is trying to start something, and the demand for capital to start something, there's going to be a shortage of it. Everyone's competing for the same capital or the same finance, yeah. So there's going to be less finance available in fast-growing economy. Separate to that, in Vietnam, the post-educational, especially Vietnam's well-educated workforce and so on, but lacks the infrastructure for innovation and technology-based kind of education. Yeah. So when we talk about or seeing educational in terms of post-school and so on, we're talking about in terms of technology or new technology or innovation or new innovations in terms of education. So Vietnam's also weak in terms of post-school education. That means university and after university education or higher university education. Another weakness in Vietnam is also the government programs. It has improved more recently, especially in 2007, 2018. Compare that to 2013 or 2014, early years, because the Vietnam Startup Nation program hasn't really kicked in until sort of like 2015 or so on. That's when it came about. So that's when at IU and other university, they start doing all these competitions on a regular basis. Although 2020 and 2021, due to COVID and lacking of government monies and so on, yeah, so Vietnam government, especially with the slow economy due to lockdowns and so on, and high spending on vaccine and other programs to help with the lockdown and COVID pandemic and so on, Vietnam is going to have a lot less money to invest in these startups or even startup nation programs. But it has improved. It has major improvement, especially I've kind of seen and followed the government programs in Vietnam since 2010 and so on. Back then, there was virtually no programs at all to do with to help startups and entrepreneurs and so on. Government programs start to increase more recently since 2014, 2015 and so on, when startup nation policies and so on started kicking. So this chart will show a lot more. Yeah, red line represents the average across all nations, and the blue line represents the survey in Vietnam itself. So what we saw was finance. You can see it's quite weak. Post-education, another weak dimension. And also, what was the third one? The third weakness was government program. Government program, where is it? Here. So it's about 2. Yeah. Whereas other dynamics tends to be a lot higher. So things like internal market or domestic market dynamic, physical infrastructure, cultural and social norm are quite high. Yeah, so these are the 3 high dimension, and these are the 3 low dimension: finance, post school education, and government program. Okay, so compared to, I think it's about 6-7 years ago, 2014, compared to recent survey. So this is 2014, this is the latest data, 2017, 2018. So you can see the number of entrepreneurs intending to start a business is increasing. Yeah, it has increased since 18.2% to 25%. That number might decrease in 2020, 2021 due to COVID. But you see that in fast growing economy such as Vietnam, number of business or startups has improved. Yeah, it's especially with government programs and competitions and so on to help startups and entrepreneurs throughout Vietnam. It has been effective. So you can see there's an increase. Yeah, so 18% to 25%. That's a 7% increase. Same with established business as well. So successful business, so business which has been more than 3.5 years in operation. Back in 2014, there was only 22%. Yeah, so more recent years, 2017, 2018, that has jumped to 25%. So chance of success has also increased, yeah, due to the fast-growing economy. So, like I said earlier, in growing economy, the whole economy are being lifted at the same time. So if you start a startup in a lifting economy, you rise with the economy as well. Hence, chance of success is a lot higher. So more startups and so on are getting into the pipeline of starting business. In terms of network of support for businesses in Vietnam, in general, majority of startups get helps from their friends and family, from their spouse and life companions, from their parents and so on. Those in general where you get a lot of help from. Help means advice as well as capital and investments and so on. In terms of weaknesses, so in terms of getting advice as well as financial supports and so on, from competitors. That's pretty obvious. Researchers and inventors, they're less likely to help you. Lawyers and public advertising services and so on, banks and so on, they tend to be less helpful in terms of advice as well as capital. When we look at banks, and talking about in terms of capital, don't forget, capital means investments. So friends and families more likely to give you capital. So in other words, capital to invest in your company, not loans. Banks might help you in terms of loans. Loans and capital are two different things. So be careful with that. So we kind of look at survey how entrepreneurs regard in Vietnam itself. So it's quite a respectful career path. Entrepreneurs or business owners are well respected in Vietnam. They help create jobs. They help contribute to the economy. Especially in a fast-growing economy such as Vietnam, it helps with this growth itself. But other cultures and so on also affect startups and entrepreneurs quite a large impact. So there has been a lot of research recently to do on how culture affect businesses. Vietnam is different culture and so on. It's a Confucius culture. And Lam and Patel in 1994 argued that Confucianism is correlated with economic development. So Confucianism, such as Vietnam's society and culture, helps with startups and economic development. What do I mean by Confucianism? For those who are not unfamiliar with Confucianism, compared to the West, such as Europe and US, Confucianism talks more about respect of your parents or teachers and so on, of your older people who are older than you and so on. Confucianism tends to put a lot of emphasis in terms of education as well as family and so on, compared to European culture or US culture. So other countries which are Confucius in nature are like China or Taiwan or Japan or Korea and so on. So those, as well as Vietnam, so those are Confucius countries. So Confucianism helps and correlate with economic development. It doesn't hold economy back, being a Confucius country. Hofstede, in 1984, I think he also researched and given the definition of entrepreneurships, which we covered earlier, argue that culture dimension, we'll go through this 6 dimension of culture in a moment. Culture dimensions such as the power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism, collectivism, masculinity, femininity affect national wealth and economic growth as well. And different country has different weighting of this cultural dimension. And these cultural dimensions do last a very long time, difficult to change. So each country has a kind of like a fingerprint on what cultural dimension they have. And this persists for a very long time. Nation does not change the culture quickly. So in general, it's retained its cultural dimension for a very long time. We'll go through that, and we will cover Vietnam's 6 cultural dimension, compare that to the US 6 cultural dimension, as well as Thailand, another Asian country, um, how they're different in their cultural dimension or different weighting in terms of dimension, and how it affects their economic development. In addition, Morris and Davis in 1994 showed that entrepreneurship declined with more collectivism that is emphasized. We'll look at the collectivism later on in the Hofstede research. And it also covers one of the dimension is individualism and collectivism. Yeah, so the more individualized the nation is, the more likely entrepreneurship tends to be stronger. Yeah, so show that entrepreneurship declines. So there's a negative correlation between successful entrepreneurs and collectivism. So in other words, individualism is good for entrepreneurship, and collectivism is bad for entrepreneurship. In addition, Lee Patterson kind of drawn well upon Lumpkin and Dees, another research in 1996, proposed that society's propensity to generate autonomous risk-taking, so being a risk-taker and so on, or as well as being innovative and competitively aggressive, are good for entrepreneur also. So risk-taking, innovative, and competitive, so those kind of dimensions, yeah, are good for entrepreneurship. Yeah, so we're looking at Vietnam at the moment in terms of the risk uncertainty avoidance. That's equivalent to risk. And we can probably put it in brackets, yeah. Risk uncertainty, risk avoidance. So for country which like risk, is good for entrepreneurs. Yeah, so uncertainty avoidance would be bad for entrepreneurs. Yeah, that's what Lee and Patterson, as well as Lumpkin and Dee, have found. So these are proactive entrepreneurs, and firm depends on cultural characteristic. Yeah, we'll cover these characteristics for each country in a moment. So what is culture? What are the culture dimensions? See, a little bit smaller. Okay. So culture is like an iceberg. There's a little bit being exposed. Majority of culture are not exposed, are not on the surface. You will not see these things. As a foreigner coming to, say, Vietnam, or as a Vietnamese going and visit another country, such as, say, Germany or the UK, you might see the surface culture. So things like surface culture are like food. Yeah, so Vietnamese food is going to be different from German or British food. Their flags will be different. They have different holidays and festivals. Yeah, in Vietnam we have that. In European country and so on, they may have things like Christmas and so on. Yeah, which also kind of celebrate in Vietnam as well, but not as big as a holiday compared to in Europe and the UK. We have different holidays. We have different kind of music, different performances, dance, game, art and craft, languages, literatures, and so on. Yeah, so when you visit another country, these surface culture are obvious. Yeah, you'll see this. But what you don't see is the deep culture. A majority of people are affected, if anything, more so by the deep culture than the surface culture. So surface culture, there's only a few things like food, flag, language, and so on, music, dances and so on. Yeah, these are surface culture, and they're the one which get exposed to when you visit other country or as a tourist. You will see these are relatively quite obvious. What's not so obvious are the deep culture, such as communication style and rules and so on. So for a Vietnamese or for a foreign student or foreigners, yeah, things like different facial expression or gesture or eye contacts is going to be different from country to country. Touching, body language, conversational patterns in different society situations, handling of emotions, tone of voice, and so on. Yeah, they tend to be very, very different. I mean, in Vietnamese, we have multi-tone. Yeah, so different tones means different thing. Germanic language tends to be very strong. Yeah, very masculine kind of language. Sounds like people shouting at you rather than speaking to you. And in terms of gestures, in different culture has different hand gesture as well. Yeah. So let me switch to my view, for example. In terms of hand gesture, when I, like for example, the hand signal, I think most of you probably notice this hand gesture just means okay, yeah, in other language or in other culture. But be careful, in South America, this means a bad gesture. It means that you're calling someone an asshole, for example. In Vietnamese as well. This in European kind of language or culture, this means good luck. Yeah, in Vietnamese, this means a bad thing. Yeah, bad signal. In British, in UK culture, for example, especially be careful when you talk to British people. This is a bad hand gesture. In most culture, this means two of something or maybe victory. Yeah. In English culture, this means go away. Yeah, in very rude language. So different culture has different gesture, has different things involved. Yeah. So be careful of that, and not a lot of these will be obvious to you unless you spend a lot of time in that country. Other deep culture include courtesy, manners, friendship, leaderships, cleanliness, modesty, beauties, and so on. So we talk about Vietnam being more of a Confucius kind of society. Most of the Germanic kind of country like Germany, Holland, Denmark, and so on, they tend more of a Catholic kind of societies or cultures and so on. So each has their own influences or different influences. Other concepts are like self, time, past, future, fairness, and justice. Yeah? We have different laws, different regulations, and so on, and different emphasis based on different things. Role related to age, sex, class, family, and so on are also very, very different from country to country. In some country, like for example, India, you have caste system. In UK, as well to a certain extent in Germanic kind of country, you also have a class system as well. So you have like the royal families and dukes and duchesses and barons and so on. In Vietnam culture or communist kind of country, they have different kind of class forms and so on. There's other attitude as well, cultural attitude towards our elders, adolescents, dependents, rules, expectations, work authority, and so on as well. Each of these countries has different cultures, and they do affect not only the person itself, but also the startups or the business or the entrepreneurships and so on as well. Other deep cultures include approach to religion, courtships, marriages, raising kids or children, decision making, and problem solving as well. Yeah, all these deep cultures, there's lots more which is unseen below the surface. Will also, if anything, affect business or attitude towards startups and entrepreneurships more so compared to the stuff which we tend to see on the surface. Okay, let's see. Let's watch some YouTube video. Yeah, so like I said, I try to keep mix things up a little bit to make things a little bit more interesting. And let's switch to a different media. So we'll cover this Hofstede's sixth cultural dimension. So let's figure out what does this sixth cultural dimension means. We'll cover the difference between, say, Vietnam, United States, and Thailand. But if you go to this website, gershofstede.com, you can find out other countries and how they differ in terms of these different weighting in the sixth cultural dimension. But we'll cover what the sixth cultural dimension means. Yeah. So let's watch this YouTube video. It's on mute for some reason. Let me see if I can share the tab. Give me a moment. Let me fix this problem.
You may have heard it said before, not all who wander are lost. What you may not know is that line is from a poem Tolkien wrote in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. If you've read or seen The Fellowship of the Ring, you will remember that a big part of that storyline involves people from vastly different cultures joining together to accomplish a daunting goal that requires them to work with others and traverse many miles across strange and wonderful lands. One of my favorite scenes in the entire trilogy is near the beginning of that epic saga. The journey begins with 4 hobbits leaving their home. Hobbits are beings who are known for their appreciation of stability and the comfort of home. As they leave the Shire, one of the hobbits has a bit of an existential moment. Cast the ring into Mount Doom. We're in a similar situation in our global environment. Because of the technology, social media, the ease of travel, affordable shipping, and international trade agreements, we live in a global situation. It is no longer probable that one can stay in our own Shire. It's very likely, if not certain, that you will live or work with someone from a different culture than your own. Further, we have the responsibility to understand other cultures so long as conflicts in the Middle East affect oil prices in the United States, or population growth in China increases demand for coal-based electricity, which sends smogs into the air. Or if you suffer from a case of wanderlust and you have the desire to see other beauty beyond what you can see from your front door. As the globe figuratively began shrinking in the 1980s, Geert Hofstede released Culture's Consequences, founding the concept of comparative intercultural research. He was the first to create an objective model to understand the dimensions of national culture. His work has created a paradigm for us to understand elements of cross-cultural communication and cooperation. Hofstede defines national culture in 6 different dimensions: power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. Power distance is about how people consider inequalities among people. If a country has high power distance, they appreciate a sense of hierarchy. Low power distance means that people expect power to be more equally distributed. For example, a traditional monarchy would be considered high power distance. Mexico and China are among the nations with the highest power distance score, while Denmark, Israel, and Austria are the lowest. Individualism might be characterized by those whose priorities are to take care of themselves and their immediate families. A low individualism score would be called collectivism and represents a preference for tightly knit social groups that extend to much farther beyond the immediate family, to other relatives and to those who live in the same community, organization, or other social groups. The United States has the highest score on the individualism scale, while countries like Guatemala, South Korea, and Pakistan are among the most collectivist. Masculinity can be tricky to understand because of the title. A high score represents a culture who prioritizes competition, heroism, assertiveness, and tangible rewards. The opposite side of this spectrum values cooperation, modesty, caring for the weak, and improving the quality of life. Japan has the highest score while Sweden has the lowest. For example, Japan is an industrious country known for working diligent, long hours. Sweden offers by law 480 days of paid parental leave per child. Sweden also gives 1% of its GDP to foreign aid, a higher percentage by GDP than any other country. Uncertainty avoidance measures how a country handles the unknown or the future. If a country tries to control the future, then it would score highly, or if it accepts the future and lets it happen, then they score low on this dimension. Cultures that score highly on this dimension also value orthodox behavior. Low uncertainty avoidance would be indicated by valuing the pragmatic over principle. Greece and Japan are among the highest, while Jamaica and Singapore are the lowest. Long-term orientation is about how a country approaches the balance of staying grounded in its history while evolving into the future. Long-term oriented cultures appreciate time-honored traditions and norms and are suspicious of change. Short-term oriented cultures embrace the evolution with expediency through modernization and education. China is the country with the most long-term orientation, while some African countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone are among the most short-term oriented. Indulgence is the newest dimension in the Hofstede research. It measures the degree to which a culture values gratification and the expectation of freely enjoying life. Indulgent cultures prioritize freedom of speech and personal control, while cultures of restraint accept a sense of helplessness about one's destiny. Countries with high indulgence, like the United States, might experience this by having customer service agents who are expected to be all smiles and friendly, while a country like Russia would consider this awkward or inappropriate. As you can imagine, these elements of culture represent a fundamental difference in the way people experience life. These dimensions illustrate the symbols that hold meaning, the heroes we idolize, the rituals we practice to tell our stories. All of these shed light on our core values as a particular group of people. My challenge to you is to explore the scores of various nations. Simply Google Hofstede and the name of any country. The first result will likely take you to the Hofstede official website. While there, you can compare one culture to another. Scroll down to read more information about that specific country and its cultural dimensions.
Okay. So those are the 6-dimension description. Let me share you my screen. So let's just recall how does this measure how different people refer to different people. In Vietnam's cultural, Confucius culture, in general, we tend to respect our elders or people in authority. So in general, Vietnamese tends to, so let's look at Vietnam, for example. Vietnam is in gray, Thailand's in green, and the US is in blue. Okay, so power culture, how people respect authority. Vietnam in general is high in this power distance. We over-respect people of authority. So 70% or score 70. We don't call it percentage, but it's just a scale. Yeah, high means high in that particular dimension. So high in power distance, respect of our authority. Whereas blue, which is the US, in Western culture, authority is less respected. So here we got a score of 40. In general, in Western culture such as the US, people refer to other people, whether they have authority or not, as similar to their peers. So in general, the difference between someone which has authority and someone who do not have authority, in general, in Western culture, they refer to themselves or each other like they're in the same peer group. Whereas in Confucius cultures, such as Vietnam as well as Thailand or other Asian countries, we respect people of authority, people who are older than us, teachers and so on, tend to be over-respected as such. In the other dimension, in the video, in the YouTube video, it talks about individualism as well as collectivism. Yeah, individualism is good for entrepreneurs. Yeah, collectivism can be a bad dimension for entrepreneurs. Yeah, we see this from the research of, if you remember the previous slide, independence. Yeah, Morris and Davis. So show that entrepreneurship is inversely correlated with collectivism. So it's correlated with independentalism or individualism. And in general, Vietnam, the individualism is very low. Yeah, so this particular dimension, Vietnam is relatively quite weak at, or as well as other Asian nations, such as Thailand. Whereas Western culture, such as the United States, individualism can be a lot higher. Yeah, we talk about, we'll later talk about what makes a good entrepreneur. So typically, a good entrepreneur usually tends to be the only child of the family or the eldest child of the family. Main reason why the only child or the eldest child, because the only child and the eldest child tends to be more individualism or more of an individual. Other people depend on them than they depend on other people. Yeah, if you're the single child of a family, more people is going to depend on you than you depend on. You don't have siblings to depend on. Separately, if you are the eldest child, your siblings is going to depend on you, yeah, because you're the eldest, you're more knowledgeable and so on. In general, individualism in general tends to make very good entrepreneurs or characters or coaches, which emphasize more in terms of individualism, tends to be better or generate more entrepreneurs compared to cultures such as Vietnam and Thailand, or Asian culture, which is low in terms of individualism, but high in terms of collectivism. It can be a weak point. But it depends in reality. From Hofstede's research, he kind of say that collectivism's culture can be high in terms of entrepreneurship as well. Things like, for example, a lot of communist country, if the government encourage policies, such as startup nation and so on. So if the government encourage these entrepreneurships kind of policies and so on, it can be as strong and helpful in terms of entrepreneurship as well. So if governments don't encourage entrepreneurships and startup kind of policies, then collectivism can be very weak when it comes to entrepreneurship. But if a central government encourage entrepreneurships, it can be good, especially in a collectivism kind of culture as well. So be careful with this. So take this with a pinch of salt. US might be good at entrepreneurships, especially with individualism. Vietnam and Asian nations tend to have low individualism, high in terms of collectivism. But if governments and so on encourage entrepreneurships, it can be much, much stronger than the dimension of independent or individualism itself. Because as a collectivism, if there's a government policies, the whole country, the whole nation will do it. So if there's a direction and so on, a central direction and so on, it can be good for entrepreneurships as well. The next dimension, which covered in video, is the masculinity and femininity. We kind of see that US tends to have very higher masculinity kind of culture, whereas Asian nations such as Vietnam and Thailand and so on, we see tends to be relatively quite low, around 40 score for Vietnam and 34 for Thailand. But the difference is not that high. We kind of see that anyhow, especially in Vietnam now. In the recent kind of survey, 2017, 2018, what we just saw, there were more women starting businesses than men, which is quite surprising. In most years in Vietnam, more men tend to start business than women. So at least you see here, women tend to have a lot more power, or femininity tends to be higher in Vietnam compared to Western culture, such as the US or other European country. The next dimension, which video cover, or Hofstede cover, is uncertainty avoidance or risk avoidance. In general, Asian cultures and so on, especially Vietnam itself, they tend to be very risk averse. In the US, Western culture, it's about mediocre, and here we see that Thai culture tends to be high risk taking. But we saw from the research, risk liking can be good for entrepreneurs. We looked at Lee and Peterson, as well as Lumpkin and Dee, which basically propose society propensity to generate risk taking are good or proactive for entrepreneurs. So at least we can see here, since Vietnam is a low risk-taking kind of culture, it can be a bad effect on entrepreneurs or starting businesses in general. Whereas US and Thailand, they tend to be more, have a higher risk appetite compared to Vietnam. So hence, for them, at least in terms of uncertainty avoidance, other countries are stronger than Vietnam when it comes to this. The fifth cultural dimension, which covered in the video, or Hofstede's sixth dimension, is long-term, short-term. Vietnam has a longer term view. Yeah? Vietnam tends to orientate, in terms of people in Vietnam, we tend to save more. Yeah, we tend to be risk averse, but not only that, we tend to save more money in the bank than borrow money and so on. So in general, we'll see that most people, most students in the class will not have a credit card or even borrow any form of money. But most international students from Europe or US or other country will own a credit card and probably utilize their credit card on a regular basis, yeah, and basically borrow money on debt and so on. So in general, long-term view and so on, in terms of, it can be quite good when it comes to entrepreneurship. It's about investment. It's about long-term investment. Startups and so on is not a short-term endeavor. It's a long-term endeavor. So having a long-term orientation so on, can be a good thing for entrepreneurship. And so Vietnam might be weak in terms of uncertainty avoidance, so bad for entrepreneurship, but they have long-term orientation and so on, a long-term view in terms of investments and doing something. It takes time. Yeah. So in general, at least in this dimension, it's strong for entrepreneurship and also is strong in Vietnam compared to other culture. The last dimension, which covered by the video, or Hofstede's sixth dimension, is indulgent and restrained. Western culture tends to indulge more. So US, you can see here, the indulgence score is almost 70 score, whereas Vietnam and even Confucius cultures in general, Asian culture in general, they tend to be more restrained compared to indulgence and so on. Yeah. So to do investments on, it can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing to a certain extent as well in terms of investments and so on. You know, be a restraint on investment and so on, instead of spending and investing and growing and scaling up and so on. So it can be good and bad. So in general, the culture or the characteristic to be good entrepreneurs, or the ideal type to be entrepreneurs, as Lee and Peterson kind of shown in their research, entrepreneurs tend to be risk taker, so generally accept uncertainty and risk. They don't tolerate unequal relationship. They believe in laws and so on. So if there is strict laws or regulation and so on, they rules and so on, or pre-written and so on, and follow. They like that kind of structure because the more work they do, the more reward they get, and so on. That there will not be unfair or unequal relationship. They will also stress materialism and wealth, because they need to be driven by something. You do more work, then you should be more rewarded. So if you're if you're high in terms of materialism and liking in terms of wealth, you work harder, because you try to be an entrepreneur and be an entrepreneur, you get rich and you have more materialism and so on. So it drives them to do something, to go out there and start a business. Not everyone can do it. So you have to have, in some culture, this can be a bad characteristics and so on. But to be an entrepreneur, you have to drive to go out there and do that extra thing, because not everyone try to start a business or even go out their way to do this. Entrepreneurs also emphasize individual accomplishment as well. That's why individualism is a strong component when it comes to entrepreneurships as well. Yeah. So the single child or the eldest child of the family You're not dependent on others, it's others dependent on you. So emphasizing individualism or individual accomplishment is good to have as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs also believe in power. Status is earned through competition and hard work and so on. And you will be rewarded with wealth and materialism the more work you put into your efforts and so on. Because if you don't believe in that, you don't put in the hard work to do your startups or go out there and do that extra thing, then you should not be rewarded for the non-hard work and so on. So these kind of emphasis would drive people to go out of their way and do that extra thing to be more wealthier or have more materialism and so on. Entrepreneurs also believe in the code of law. You need to be fair. Unequal relationships, people do less work but reward more, can be a bad thing. So entrepreneurs, they need to believe in they will not tolerate unequal relationship. They believe in the code of law. The more you put in, the more effort you put in, the more you reward. And if they are driven by wealth and materialism, they will put in that extra effort to do their entrepreneurship or startups and so on. They go out of their way to do that extra thing. So these are the good kind of culture or the good kind of characters when it comes to entrepreneurs or even startups. And we kind of see this throughout this Hofstede's 6 cultural dimensions. Okay, I think we run out of time. It's 3:40 now. Any question from anyone? Anyone have any question? Okay, if there are no questions, we'll call it the end for this week, and we'll continue with the class next week. I think it's a different topics. I think we finish all of culture. We'll move on to different topics next week. So maybe a few slides. I think 2 more slides. There's one slide on Vietnam cultural values and male and female entrepreneurs and so on. Yeah, 2 more slides, and then we'll finish these topics on culture, and then we move on to the next topic, which is entrepreneurship as an evolving concept. Okay. Okay. So if there's no question, I will see you or talk to you next week. Don't forget, this class is recorded, so if you want to see it again, go to the link on YouTube. You should be able to watch it again. For those foreign students, different time zones and so on, don't forget that recorded class will be available to you